The first time it happened, it felt like the world had shifted just for that moment. There was something in the way he looked, a spark that went beyond curiosity, beyond desire. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition, as if he saw everything that had been hidden, all the layers built over years of pretending to be invisible, and somehow loved it. It made a part of me tremble, the part that had long been numb from disappointment, from believing passion and tenderness were luxuries meant for someone else. And yet here he was, with a quiet confidence and a warmth that could melt walls, making it impossible to stay guarded. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly, with shared glances, subtle touches that lingered too long to be accidental. There was an electricity in ordinary moments, in the way he would brush past my hand, the way he laughed softly when something inside me startled him. At first, it was terrifying to feel this way again. Fear whispered, warning that this was wrong, that attraction like this could only lead to heartbreak or worse, judgment. But desire, that insistent force, was stronger. It demanded attention, demanded presence, and slowly, it carved a path through years of hesitation. The first time he held me really had me. It was nothing like what I remembered from youth. There was no rush, no impatience, only a careful, reverent attention, as if discovering the contours of my body was a sacred act rather than a fleeting pleasure. Every touch spoke volumes, longing, appreciation, awe, and in that attention, a long, buried confidence began to return. It was intoxicating to realize that someone could see not just a body, but a story, and love it anyway, with all its imperfections, its past, its quiet scars. The way he traced my skin, tender and insistent, felt like a conversation spoken in silence, a dialogue of trust and surrender that neither of us needed words to understand. Late nights became confessions, not the kind weighed down by guilt or expectation, but the kind that laid bare everything, revealing parts of ourselves we hadn't known, were longing for acknowledgement. His presence was both comforting and electrifying. One night, as moonlight spilled across the room, he leaned close and whispered things that made my chest ache, things that made me want to dissolve into him completely. It was more than physical. It was recognition of all the loneliness, all the longing, all the unsaid dreams that had lingered in the corners of my heart. It was awakening, and it was inevitable. Every encounter felt like a discovery. Even the mundane became charged, the brush of hands while passing, the accidental touch that lingered, the small, intimate gestures that spoke louder than words ever could. And as the passion grew, so did the tenderness. There was no shame, no hesitation in being known. It was thrilling and terrifying to let go, to admit that vulnerability could coexist with desire, that love could be wild and soft all at once. The younger energy he brought didn't diminish me. It mirrored a part of myself I thought had disappeared, bold, curious, hungry for connection. It wasn't only the moments of intimacy that defined this connection, but the way he listened, the way he observed without judgment, the way he celebrated each fragile confidence I dared to offer. There were afternoons spent talking about nothing and everything, his eyes never leaving mine, holding space for the parts I'd long left hidden. And in those silences, the connection deepened, the way rivers cut through stone, steady and relentless, carving out a space where true belonging could flourish. There were moments of doubt, of course. Questions crept in. Is this the right thing to do? Can this last? Am I foolish to hope for more than fleeting pleasure? But those doubts dissolved when he touched my face with that same careful reverence, when he held me through quiet nights, when his warmth reminded me that love like this isn't about age or timing or convention. It's about presence, about recognition, about two people daring to find a spark and nurture it into a fire that warms everything around it. The intensity of this bond was inescapable. Each encounter left a mark, not scars, but echoes of connection that lingered long after we parted. My body remembered his touch, yes, but my heart remembered the feeling of being seen, wholly and without hesitation. It was the first time in years that I realized how alive one could feel when someone else's devotion made space for your own to emerge. There was passion, yes, but also grace. There was desire, but also respect. There was a raw honesty that made every moment feel sacred. By the time the first week turned into a month, it wasn't just about the physical anymore. It was the way he made the ordinary feel extraordinary. The way a simple meal could feel like an intimate celebration. The way his gaze could make time stand still. There was joy in surrender, in allowing someone to love not just the surface, but the hidden recesses, the quiet vulnerabilities that often go unnoticed. And as each day passed, the fire within me, long dormant, burned brighter, not just with lust, but with love, with recognition, with a sense of being fully alive for the first time in years. And in that recognition, in that unfolding of desire and tenderness, the world shifted. It wasn't just the thrill of passion, though it was undeniable. It was the awakening of a soul that had grown cautious, jaded, even weary. It was the proof that love, true love, could arrive unannounced, unexpected, fierce and tender all at once, reminding a heart that it is never too late to feel this intensely, this completely. Everything else, the past, the doubts, the fear of judgment, faded in comparison to the truth of the moment. To be seen, holy, and loved anyway is to be truly alive. There was a moment late one night when the weight of everything held back for years pressed too heavily, and the walls that had always seemed necessary finally cracked. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, it was quiet, a subtle surrender. Words that had been swallowed for decades, fears that had been hidden behind laughter, smiles, and careful composure, all came tumbling out in a way that felt dangerous and liberating at once. The air was thick with tension, but not judgment. There was only presence. He didn't flinch at the tremor in the voice, at the confession of old scars, or the insecurities that had long shaped the way the world was faced. Instead, there was a kind of reverent stillness, a warmth that reached through the vulnerability and held it like something precious, fragile yet undeniable. Every imperfection, every mark of the past had been a source of shame, something carefully concealed from the eyes of the world. And yet, in this space, those very imperfections became a bridge. When the rawness of fear, regret, and longing was laid bare, it was met not with criticism, but with awe. It was as if each revelation whispered, "I see you. I see all of you, and I want you still." And in that acknowledgement, the first tendrils of freedom began to stir. The act of revealing, of showing what had always been hidden, became a kind of intimacy far deeper than any physical connection could reach. It wasn't about seduction or desire. It was about recognition, the kind that settles into the soul and makes the heart expand in ways that nothing else can. There were hesitations, of course. Every time a memory surfaced, painful, raw, embarrassing, there was a flicker of fear. Will this make him run? Will this exposure end the connection? But with every whispered confession, every tear and tremor, the answer became clearer. Love, true love, does not shrink from flaws. It reaches for them, embraces them, and transforms them into something cherished. It was startling how quickly the walls built over decades began to feel unnecessary, how a space once occupied by doubt and caution was suddenly filled with warmth, acceptance, and desire. It wasn't just emotional vulnerability that mattered. It was the body, too, carrying all the traces of life, both tender and imperfect. In quiet, unhurried moments, the hands that explored did so with reverence, with awe, with a sense of devotion that made the body feel alive in a way that had been forgotten. Every scar, every line, every imperfection was noticed, admired even, not as a flaw, but as a story, a testament to life lived fully. In his touch, the insecurities dissolved, replaced by a sense of belonging, of being wholly seen and desired. It was as though vulnerability had become the key not just to love, but to being truly celebrated. Even the smallest gestures carried weight. A brush of fingers across the arm, a lingering gaze, the quiet murmur of acknowledgement, each one a reassurance that being known, fully and unreservedly, was not dangerous but sacred. In that space, it became impossible to hide. There was no need to. To hide would be to deny the very connection that was unfolding, a connection rooted in authenticity, tenderness, and desire that transcended the physical. And as the nights passed, the walls dissolved more and more. What had once been fear became anticipation, excitement, and trust. The act of revealing the private, intimate truths of the soul became a celebration of them, a ritual of acceptance that bound hearts closer than words ever could. There were moments when the fear of exposure lingered, moments when the insecurities whispered that love like this could not possibly last. But every time, the response was quiet, unwavering, a steady affirmation that vulnerability was never a liability, but the doorway to a love that was both tender and fiery, emotional and sensual. The body and soul were no longer separate. Desire intertwined with tenderness, intimacy with acceptance, making every encounter a profound affirmation of being fully seen, fully wanted, fully cherished. It was remarkable how quickly the presence of genuine acceptance reshaped everything. The self, consciousness that had once dictated movements, conversations, and even dreams began to fade. Each acknowledgement of vulnerability was met with devotion, each hesitation answered with patience, each confession welcomed with desire. The freedom in that recognition was intoxicating. It was a kind of joy that vibrated through the chest, spreading to the fingertips, awakening a sense of self that had been quieted for too long. To be seen in full, without pretense, without reservation, and still be wanted, there was nothing else like it. Even ordinary moments carried extraordinary weight. A shared silence over morning coffee, a touch that lingered just slightly too long, a laugh that held a hint of mischief and understanding. These became acts of love, small confirmations that vulnerability could be safe, that desire could coexist with tenderness, that intimacy could honor both body and soul, and in that delicate balance, something profound unfolded, the realization that openness, honesty, and courage in sharing oneself were not weaknesses, but the very foundation of being cherished fully. Every story of the past, every fear once hidden in the shadows, became part of the connection, woven seamlessly into moments of passion, moments of comfort, moments of quiet reverence. And in that weaving, there was a clarity, a truth, love that embraces vulnerability, that honors every scar and insecurity, is a love that can endure, that ignites the body and soul alike, and that transforms every encounter into something unforgettable, sacred, and alive. The last touch before dawn, the last whispered word before silence settled, carried the weight of all that had been revealed. It was not just the thrill of intimacy, not just the longing of desire, but the profound soul-stirring understanding that being fully seen and accepted was the greatest gift, the truest pleasure, the deepest love. To be known completely, without fear, and still loved beyond measure, is the only way to feel truly alive. The first time it happened, it felt like the world had tilted just enough to let something long forgotten slip back in. There was a softness in the way he approached, careful, almost reverent, and it stirred a warmth in a place that had grown cold over years of solitude. Every glance held weight, every touch lingered with intention, and in those moments the body remembered what the heart had tried to bury, the raw, unfiltered sensation of being desired, of being fully seen, of being alive in a way that no one had ever made possible before. It was more than attraction, It was recognition, a kind of magnetic pull that awakened a fire that had been smoldering under layers of caution and resignation. The intimacy began not with words, but with presence. Sitting together in the quiet of a room, the way his hand brushed mine sent a ripple through my nerves, a spark that made my heart skip and my breath catch. It wasn't rushed, wasn't urgent. It was deliberate, patient, and somehow infinitely more intoxicating because of it. Each touch was an unspoken confession, a promise that here, in this closeness, vulnerability was safe, and passion could exist without fear. The awareness that someone could want every part of what had been hidden, the small flaws, the trembling insecurities, the quiet longing, made every nerve alive, every heartbeat urgent. There were evenings when nothing needed to be said. The silence itself was heavy with unspoken desire, with the tender recognition that connection was more than physical. It was spiritual, emotional, elemental. A brush of hair from the face, a thumb tracing the line of a scar, a lingering gaze held longer than it should have been. All of these gestures became a language, a dialogue of trust and longing that bypassed the need for words. And with every whispered secret, every small, careful revelation, the heart felt lighter. The weight of years of neglect, of being overlooked, began to lift in the heat of the attention, the tenderness, the simple fact of being wanted. There was a power in his touch that neither of us could define it healed, not in the sense of erasing the past, but in the sense of acknowledging it, holding it gently, and reminding that beauty and desire are not diminished by scars, by age, or by fear. Each encounter carried a duality. It was sensual, and it was sacred, physical, and emotional at the same time. The way he looked, the way he held, the way he paused long enough to let a moment settle, all made clear that intimacy was not just pleasure, but communion. And in that communion, something long dormant stirred awake, the forgotten thrill of surrender, of allowing oneself to be truly seen, truly touched, truly desired. There were nights when passion and emotion collided so completely that it left everything else irrelevant. The outside world ceased to exist, leaving only the warmth of skin against skin, the rhythm of breathing, the soft murmur of words that trembled between laughter and confession. Every kiss, every gentle pull, every whispered acknowledgement of longing became an anchor, tethering a restless heart to a joy that had been denied for too long. It was an urgency that was both fiery and soft, wild and tender, and it made each moment unforgettable because it was alive in a way that went beyond memory or expectation. Even the quiet mornings held intensity. A hand brushing a shoulder as sunlight filtered through the curtains, the lingering touch over a cup of coffee, a glance that made the stomach flutter in recognition. Every small gesture carried the weight of intimacy, a reminder that connection is measured not only in grand acts, but in the minute attentions that make someone feel wholly alive. It became impossible to distinguish where the emotional need ended and the physical desire began. They were intertwined, inseparable, each fueling the other, each deepening the bond and the fire that burned brighter with every moment shared. It was also about trust, to be held and wanted without fear, to let the walls down just enough to be completely vulnerable, required a surrender that was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. But every time he paused, every time he met the gaze with gentleness instead of judgment, that surrender felt like liberation. There was healing in it, a kind of restoration that was subtle but profound, a quiet awakening of parts that had been dormant, parts that had forgotten how to hope, to crave, to feel. The body and heart both remembered what it meant to be alive, and in that memory, desire and affection became inseparable. There were confessions spoken in hushed tones, moments when hearts opened and words could not contain the intensity of what was being felt. Each one drew the soul closer. Each one made the intimacy not just about passion, but about understanding, acceptance, and celebration. To be loved so wholly, so fiercely, so tenderly, it was a revelation. It was more than the thrill of skin meeting skin. It was the thrill of being known, of being accepted in entirety, of being cherished in ways that had seemed impossible. And it was healing in a way that no medicine, no time, no distraction could have achieved. Even in the pauses, in the stillness, the energy remained. Fingers brushed against fingertips, eyes met in quiet recognition, and every subtle gesture carried meaning. It was in these spaces that the connection deepened, that the passion softened into devotion, and that the healing of years of neglect, of self, doubt, of loneliness became tangible. Desire had become not a fleeting thrill, but a pathway to rediscovery, to a profound understanding of what it meant to be wanted and loved for all of oneself, without reservation or hesitation. By the time the nights blurred into early mornings, by the time whispered words gave way to laughter and soft sighs, it was clear that something extraordinary had unfolded. The passion was no longer just physical. It was the embodiment of being seen, the affirmation that life, desire, and love could intertwine in ways that restore and ignite at the same time. Every touch, every glance, every confession was a step further into being fully, unapologetically alive. And in that awakening, in the heat of desire paired with tenderness, there was clarity. To be touched, to be cherished, to be loved with such attention and devotion, is to find a fire that burns far deeper than skin, igniting the soul and leaving a heart fully awake. The first time it happened, it felt impossible, as if the world had placed invisible barriers between desire and permission. There was a tension that lingered, a quiet fear of judgment, of whispers, of what everyone else might think, but it didn't matter. Not really. What mattered was the way he looked at me, not with casual interest, but with a kind of reverent attention that pierced every layer I had built around myself over the years. The spark wasn't just attraction. It was recognition, a magnetic pull that felt impossible to resist, and yet wholly inevitable. Every glance, every small smile, carried the weight of something deeper than what society said should exist between us. It was raw, undeniable, and utterly alive. At first, it was subtle, moments stolen in quiet corners, hands brushing as if by accident, laughter shared that seemed far too intimate for strangers, for people of different worlds and different ages. There was fear there, yes, fear of what the world might say, fear of crossing invisible lines, but it was overshadowed by the pulse that quickened whenever he was near. It was impossible to pretend indifference when every gesture, every word, hinted at a connection that refused to be ignored. And slowly, the walls that had seemed permanent began to tremble, shaking under the weight of something that demanded to be recognized, to be felt fully, without shame or hesitation. The first night alone with him was transformative. There was no rush, no expectation, only a slow, deliberate exploration of what had been locked away for so long. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word became a declaration, not just of desire, but of acceptance. Age, convention, embarrassment, they all melted away in the heat of that presence. What had always seemed forbidden became sacred, and what had once seemed impossible became tangible. In that space, the world outside could not reach, could not judge, could not diminish what was unfolding. Desire, tenderness, love, all converged into a single, consuming force that awakened senses and emotions long dormant. It wasn't just physical. The intimacy extended to the heart, to the mind, to the small, hidden pieces of a life carefully curated to avoid exposure. Every secret, every fear, every longing could be shared without hesitation, without judgment. He held each confession with reverence, as if the vulnerability itself were precious, and in doing so, made it safe to surrender fully. There was a liberation in that, a freedom that had nothing to do with youth or societal approval, and everything to do with the profound human need to be seen, truly seen, and still be wanted. Even in public, the awareness between us was electric, subtle but undeniable. A touch of the hand under the table, a brush of the shoulder, a glance that lingered a fraction too long. It was a private language, a secret understanding that what we shared was ours, and ours alone. There was no need to explain, to justify, to hide in shame. The connection defied convention, defied expectation, and in doing so, it strengthened. The outside world could whisper, could frown, could speculate, but nothing could diminish what we had discovered together. A fire that did not care for age, for rules, for judgment. The nights were filled with an intensity that surprised me. It wasn't reckless. It was thoughtful, deliberate, and entirely consuming. Every touch was electric, every kiss a reminder that the heart and body do not adhere to calendars or societal approval. Desire is not measured in years, and love cannot be constrained by the world's definitions. In those hours, passion and tenderness were inseparable. It was impossible to distinguish where longing ended and deep affection began. And in that fusion, there was healing, awakening, a reminder that the heart can always find new ways to ignite, no matter the passage of time. We laughed about the judgments that might come, the eyebrows that might raise, the whispers that could follow. But the laughter was tinged with defiance, with recognition that life is too short, too precious, to allow fear of public opinion to dictate private joy. And as we held each other, as we explored, as we revealed ourselves without shame or reservation, the knowledge settled in. The heart's capacity for love and desire does not fade with age. It does not dwindle in the face of societal expectation. It grows, deepens, and strengthens when met with someone who dares to see it fully and honor it fiercely. Even ordinary moments carried the weight of extraordinary intimacy. A hand held while walking through a crowded street, a shared cup of coffee in the quiet of the morning, a brush of lips in the dark. It was a constant reminder that connection, true connection, thrives not on approval, but on attention, devotion, and fearless acknowledgement of desire and affection. Each gesture, no matter how small, reaffirmed that what we shared was alive, real, and completely ours. It was an intimacy that healed old wounds, that soothed insecurities, that reminded the soul what it meant to be wanted and seen. There were confessions whispered in the night, promises exchanged with trembling voices, and touches that carried unspoken acknowledgement of all that had been held back. Each one deepened the bond. Each one proved that love can transcend the barriers that society tries to impose. What others might call scandalous, daring, or inappropriate was, for us, simply the natural expression of a connection that refused to be contained. And with each day, each night, each stolen moment, the heart learned a new truth. Age and expectation are powerless against the force of authentic desire and unwavering attention. By the time the sun rose after long, consuming nights, it was clear that what we had discovered was more than passion. It was a reclamation of vitality, of confidence, of self in its most raw and beautiful form. The fire between us was a testament to the fact that love does not diminish with time, and that intimacy can awaken even the most cautious heart when it is met with recognition, patience, and unreserved devotion. Every touch, every gaze, every whispered word became proof that connection and desire are timeless, and that the heart can always find new ways to feel fully alive. And in the stillness of dawn, as the world began to stir around us, it was undeniable. The heart's capacity for love and passion does not fade. It only waits for someone brave enough to see it, to honor it, and to ignite it again. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to follow every journey of raw, true love and passion that awakens the soul. Share the emotions, stay connected, and never miss a story that reminds you how vulnerability, desire, and fearless love can transform every moment into something unforgettable. Your support helps these stories live, breathe, and reach hearts like yours every single day.